So Bhagavad Gita as it is. One of the things I recommended to a long-lost friend of one of the devotees here, Gopi Gita's mother-in-law, went to college in France. She was studying philosophy, and she had a classmate, David Straight. And David came in contact with Krishna consciousness through looking up private schools, because he found TKG Academy. And he is one that does certification, or what do you call it? Not certification, what is it? Accreditation for private schools, so that they can get credits for schools and stuff like that for moving on into higher education. And then he found out that Gopi Gita was the wife of his friend's son. And so he came to visit me, and we discussed Bhagavad Gita at length. Very, very long discussion, nice discussion. And I recommended to him that he read the introduction to Bhagavad Gita. This introduction to the Bhagavad Gita, I just listened to Prabhupada read it the other day on my, my computer, my phone. And it took him about 2.5 hours, two plus hours to read the whole thing. And literally, it's like an overview. It's like an essay of the whole Bhagavad Gita. And in this introduction, I'm just going to let you know what it says on my business card. I think some people know what it says on my business card. And Srila Prabhupada, in the introduction here, he asked a question. It's like on the 3rd or 4th page. And he says, just what is the Bhagavad Gita? So if I were to ask you, let's see, I can't remember Smita's brothers. No, I won't tell you. I just see him sitting there. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna Maharaj, this is Aditya.
Yeah, okay. So it just like, no, I'm not going to ask him a question. That's too mean. School's out now. School's out. So if we were to ask, what is Bhagavad Gita? Can someone give me an answer? I see some of my friends here. I won't call any names unless I have to. If I were to ask you, if someone, just what is Bhagavad Gita? If someone came up to you and asked you, I see Patel 1 there. I don't think that's his real name. I know who that is. Hare Krishna. So, Hare Krishna, yeah. So if I were to ask you, Patel 1, what is Bhagavad Gita, what would be your response?
Songs for Krishna.
Hare Krishna. If I were to ask you, it's like Prabhupada says here, just what is the Bhagavad Gita? And if I came up to you and I said, just what is Bhagavad Gita, what would be your response?
Songs sung by Krishna.
Song sung by Krishna. Okay. Sarvabhauma, if I were to ask you, just what is, he had his head down, he was trying to hide on me there. If I were to ask you, just what is Bhagavad Gita, what would you say?
It's the divine conversation between the Supreme Personality of Godhead and His great devotee Arjuna.
Okay.
And it helps one come out of suffering in the material world, which we're all afflicted with.
That's very good. We're getting there. We have the Supreme Personality of Godhead on the call tonight. Since he spoke the Bhagavad Gita, we'll have him ask what that Bhagavad Gita was all about.
Okay, it says the Supreme Personality of Doghead, not Godhead. But, sorry, I would say that it's just like a handbook of life.
A handbook for life. That's a good example. That's a good thing. Guru Bhakti, I see your eyes going up and searching, so I'll call on you next.
I was going to say it's a manual for.
Hare Krishna.
I usually tell people, if somebody asks me, I say that it's a manual for living your life. Just like you have a manual for when you have an appliance or an instrument. So we have this human form of life. It's meant to serve us purpose. So how should we live our lives? The manual for spiritual growth.
Yeah. Very good answers. Very good answers. It's a song of God. In the beginning, and just a few pages before, the Srila Prabhupada said, as you read Bhagavad Gita, you should, at least in theory, understand that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and he's speaking. So that's what Mr. Patel one said. I like how he's got Patel one. And that must be more than one Patel in his house. And so he says, at least in theory, one should accept, at least theoretically, one should accept that Krishna is speaking this Bhagavad Gita. And Sarvabhauma and Guru Bhakti expanded on that, and the Supreme Personality, which I don't only have that part of his name, we're explaining that it's a user guide. Just like sometimes I give the example, some of the youth bought me a new iPhone. And with the iPhone, it had a manual like this big, just to know how to use your phone. And it comes in 19 languages and whatever it's inside there and stuff like that. So just to use your phone, you need like a pamphlet. So in the same way, as Guru Bhakti mentioned, it's like a manual. And I think the Supreme Personality also mentioned it's a guidebook. And Sarvabhauma, it's meant to help the suffering. And so this is actually the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita. And Srila Prabhupada, I'll just read what he says. When he asks himself the question in this introduction, just what is the Bhagavad Gita? And Srila Prabhupada says the purpose of the Bhagavad Gita. In other words, just like I can say, just like I hand up my phone, what is my phone? You can say it's a communication device. Well, what is the purpose of that communication device? And so in the same way, the purpose of Bhagavad Gita, Srila Prabhupada says here, is to deliver mankind from the nescience of material existence. Every living entity is in the nescience of material existence in this material world. No one is out of that situation unless you're a pure devotee of the Lord and you have direct communication going on. So here, Prabhupada is explaining to deliver mankind from the nescience of material existence. In other words, we're in a particular position that we need to be, what's the right word? Extricate. In other words, we need to be removed from this material existence and placed into a eternal existence, which goes on in the land, because this is all on my part of this is on my Hare Krishna Rhtadhvaja Swami business card, where it says that every man is in difficulty in so many ways, as Arjuna was in difficulty in having to fight the battle of Kurukshetra. So Arjuna was in difficulty. Is anybody here not in difficulty? You can raise your hand, or you can put the little hand thing up if your hand's not present, if your picture is not present on the camera. Everyone, Zoom user is not in difficulty. The first person I've ever met that's not in any difficulty. No difficulty. Zoom user? You have to turn your microphone on.
No, I've got difficulties. I thought you said raise your hand if you have difficulties.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, well, this is going to ruin my whole, this is going to upstage my whole presentation here. I'm going to finally find one that wasn't in difficulty. Everyone is in difficulty. Prabhupada says here, every person is in difficulty, as Arjuna was in difficulty. So when Arjuna faced that difficulty, what was his, what do you call it? What was his action after that? When he actually came to the point of understanding that he was in difficulty, what did he do? Anybody? Any ideas?
He approached Krishna, right?
Yes, Karpanya dosha. He says, now because of miserly weakness, I have lost my composure. and I am confused about my duty. Arjuna's duty was Kshatriya. In other words, everyone has a varna. Everyone has an occupation. And within that occupation, one is meant to utilize it for serving Krishna. So Arjuna was confused about his duty, and he had lost the composure of being a Kshatriya. He lost his will to defend the duty of a Kshatriya. And he asked Krishna to, in his condition of confusion, he asked Krishna to tell him what was the best thing for him. And in that commentary, Srila Prabhupada explains that by nature's own ways, there's perplexity at every step. And therefore, the word Prabhupada uses is it behooves one to approach a spiritual master to understand why one is in this complexity, why one is in this situation where we don't know what to do and what not to do. So just as Arjuna surrendered to Krishna, Prabhupada is explaining that we're meant to surrender to Krishna. We're meant to surrender, just like we're meant to move forward towards Krishna. So when Arjuna moved towards Krishna, then Prabhupada says here, consequently, the Bhagavad-Gita was spoken. But the Bhagavad-Gita was not spoken only for Arjuna, but for every one of us is full of anxiety because of material existence. Now, this is what I put on my business card. Our very existence is in the atmosphere of non-existence. Our very existence is in an atmosphere of non-existence. In other words, we're all eternal living entities. We're eternal parts and parcels. Maya, Vangso, Jiva, Loka, Jiva, Bhuta, Sanatana. We're all eternal parts and parcel of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But we're put in a place which is temporary. We by nature, we don't die. Jayate, Mriyate, Vakadachin, Nayam Bhuta, Bhavita, that we're unborn, eternal, undying, primeval. Nahanyate, Hanyamane, Sadire, when this body is no longer fit to, retain the soul goes on to another place. I was just listening to a lecture the other day, probably was saying that just like you're driving a car, he gave two examples. One, you're driving your car, so the car is like the body and the driver is like the soul. So when the car breaks down and you get out of the car, it doesn't mean you don't have an existence outside of the broken car. You have an existence. You have an existence outside that car. Or Srila Prabhupada said, just like right now, we're sitting in this one room. If I leave this room, does it mean that I have no room to go to? No, we go from this room to the next room or to another room or to a different circumstance. And so this is the nature of this material situation that we're in. So Prabhupada says our very existence is in the atmosphere of non-existence. That sounds a little threatening to me. How does that sound to everyone here? Your very existence. I mean, it's kind of like one of those things where you really don't want to think about. Our very existence is in the atmosphere of non-existence.
It's like a fish out of water.
Like a fish out of water. That's one of our famous Hare Krishna examples, isn't it? You take a fish out of water, what can the fish do? What can a fish outside of water do to be happy? Can a fish ever be happy outside of the water? That one, Smita's brother can answer. What can a fish do to be happy outside of water?
Nothing. He has to be back in the water in order to be truly happy.
Yeah. The same way, we're out of our natural existence now. Our natural existence is in the spiritual world, which there's no birth, death, old age, and disease. And so just as a fish out of water cannot be happy, why do we feel like we can be happy here? Guru Bhakti, now you're smiling. Okay, you have an answer, Guru Bhakti?
I was thinking we are so insane.
yeah. Only a madman, right? If a fish told you, no, I can be happy here. I can be happy here. If I can just get on the best volleyball team on the beach, then I'll be happy. If I can just get one of the what do they call those townhouses on the beach, then I could be happy. If I could just get one of those race cars going down the road, then I could be happy. If I could just finish school and get good grades on my exam, then I'd be happy. And so Srila Prabhupada says there's two types of people that are happy in this world. One is the enlightened soul, and the other one is the one that's a little touched. They say in India, they say brain cracked. The only ones that are actually happy are the ones that ones are either transcended the material existence or have no awareness of their existence. They're a little touched. And so this is the situation we find here. Sarvabhauma gave a wonderful example of the fish out of water. There's no way a fish can ever be satisfied without being in the water. And so actually, Prabhupada says here, actually we're not meant to be threatened by non-existence. Anyone ever feel some sense of fear? Smita, you're nodding your head. Give us an example of your fear. I know you just finished your finals.
Like fear of failure sometimes in school.
Yeah, fear of failure. What is real success?
Krishna consciousness.
Yeah. So and I'm not that you shouldn't study. I'm not advocating that students shouldn't study for their exams and stuff. But the idea is that we don't want to throw the baby out with the bathwater. And I hope that analogy matches for this example. In other words, we don't want to overstudy our material subjects and understudy our spiritual subjects. We want to keep a what do you call it, a nice blend, a nice balance, where you're just like, I know, may I say what I said to you? In other words, Smita, I remember I told you your school is your service now, right? Yeah. I told her going to school now is her service to Krishna, so that she can get a good education and represent Krishna consciousness in a nice way to educated people. Educated people seem to have an ability to accomplish more, get more done, and help manage our society and stuff like that, whatever it may be. And so we do those things for the service of Krishna. But if we don't take care of the soul, what's the other example? Not the fish out of the water, but what's the other example, Sarvabhauma? I'm going to put you on the stage here, and I know he'll get it. When you forget, when you do all material activities but forget to engage the soul, what's the other play we do? Has to do with the bird.
The bird in the cage.
Yeah, the bird in the cage. Anybody heard this example before? Just like if you have a little pet bird. I guess I don't like to capture birds, but some birds need to be in captivity by nature. So say you have one that naturally needs to be in captivity, and you have a cage for it, and then you spend like every day you spend time decorating the cage. You clean the cage, you decorate the cage, you put some gems on it, you put some valuable stones, you gold plate it, you do so many things, but you forget to feed the bird. The purpose of the cage is to protect the bird. But if you don't feed the bird's not being protected. And so in the same way, the soul has a particular nature. It has an active nature. Actually, in the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad-Gita, it describes that by nature, the soul is the active principle in the body. Actually, Srila Prabhupada uses some pretty heavy words in the purport, where he says that the body is simply dead matter to be manipulated by the soul, to be activated by the soul. And so the reason we're active is because the soul, are actually active by nature. And so if we only polish the cage, only decorate the body, with so many different things, there's so many ways we can decorate the body. And we know all those different aspects. So what we can do is learn to feed the bird, learn to engage us, feed the soul, give ourselves some devotional activity, some devotional service, some devotional engagement, so that we can overcome the material energy. So Prabhupada says here again, we're not actually meant to be threatened by non-existence. Our existence is eternal, but somehow or another we're put into asat. Asat refers to that which does not exist. The material energy is described in this Bhagavad-Gita. It's actually described in this introduction very clearly that material energy. There are 5 topics of the Gita. There's the Supreme Lord. There's the individual soul. There's material nature. There's time. And there's karma. All of them are eternal except for karma. Our karma, we can, once you unplug our material activities, it's like unplugging the fan, right? You unplug the fan. I did that today. I unplugged the spice grinder because it got stuck and it was going to burn out. So I just unplugged the spice grinder. And so when you unplug it, it slowly goes down. Same way with the fan. You unplug the fan and it slowly stops rotating. And so the same way, when one engages in devotional service and finds himself surrendering to the Supreme Lord, it's like unplugging the fan. So we stop creating further reactions to our material activities, and now we're creating spiritual reactions to our spiritual activities. And that's building our spiritual bank balance. And so the whole thing about material energy is that sometimes it's manifested and sometimes it's unmanifested. But what is that verse? Avyakta dini bhutani. Sometimes it's manifested and sometimes it's unmanifested. Parastasmati bhavanyo bhyakta bhyakta sanatana. That beyond this manifested, unmanifested energy, there's another eternal energy of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna. That's from the 8th chapter of the Bhagavad-Gita. I'm knocking on my door again. I'm not going to answer this time. Can you hear the knocking? Okay. Oh, that's good. You can't hear, I'm not going to bother. I mean, it's a big sign, like about this big. I'm zooming. Please do not knock. And so, getting back into the material energy, sometimes it's manifested and sometimes it's unmanifested, but we are eternal parts and parcels of Krishna. And we have an eternal relationship with Krishna, which is meant to be rekindled through the process of devotional service. And this is all, as the devotees in the beginning were saying, that this is like the manual. This is like something that's meant to help us untangle us from the material existence. So any reflections, any takeaways from this first one paragraph of the introduction to the Gita? This is, we normally give classes now. We ask for takeaways. We ask for everyone to raise your hand. The Supreme Personality of Godhead.
Yes. You mentioned the word entangle, and in the Gita, in 2.7, Srila Prabhupada uses the word perplexity 10 times. 10 times. And it means like to be entangled. I just thought I'd, say that. It's amazing.
Yeah.
10 times.
Yeah, it's a very wonderful word, perplexity. I think most people are quite perplexed in this world. Because you see people, like Srila Prabhupada would say, and he gave that, in the Isha Upanishad, it's actually a lecture in London. And he says, you ask an ordinary person on the street, who are you? They'll say, I'm Mr. John. I think that's what the word name is. I'm John. I'm Bill. I'm whatever. I'm American. I'm Indian. I'm male. I'm female. I'm this. I'm that. And so many different designations. Actually, there's a famous lecture that Prabhupada ended up writing a book because people in the beginning, in 1966, people started to think, who are these guys out here? I mean, I think the devotees actually wore bed sheets back then. I'm not sure. But certainly, I don't think we had very many dhotis available at that time. And so who are these people out here with bed sheets on, jumping up and down and banging on bongos and ringing bells and stuff? And so people were saying that these people are crazy. So Prabhupada gave a famous lecture in 22nd Avenue. And he said, he challenged everybody, here, who is here who is not under some type of designation? You claim to be Americans. I claim to come from India. You claim to be male. I claim to be female. You belong to this organization. You belong to that organization. You belong to this party. You belong to that party. Everyone has some type of designation. We designate ourselves as eternal servants of Krishna. You designate yourself as something that's temporary. Who's really crazy? He says, who is really the one that's not in touch with the reality? And so that perplexity, and it would be nice to look that, we can look that up sometime, the perplexity of the material energy. And that's the business of the material energy. The duty of material energy is to flourish. In other words, we decided that we were going to leave the association of Krishna. We come into this material energy. That's the result. Just like someone decides that they're not going to follow the law, they get put in incarceration. In the same way, we decide we're not going to live peacefully or, in the spiritual world, then the result is we come into the material world. It's like a penitentiary, but we have to undergo repetition of birth and death. And so in the prison house, there's no peaceful situation. In the same way, in this material world, there's no peaceful situation. And so there's perplexity at every step. Thank you, Supreme Personality. Anyone else have some reflections for me? Some takeaways.
It's hard to understand how somebody can act in this world without creating karma. It's sort of counterintuitive. Can you comment on that?
Because Krishna explains that at the end of the Gita. Sarvadharma pritya jamame kamsaranam braja. That just surrender unto me, and I will protect you from all sinful reactions. So when one is actually surrendered, when one actually surrenders himself to Krishna and is doing the activities in relationship to Krishna, then one is not held accountable for those, what would you say, incidental, the collateral damage. Right now we're held responsible for the, there's collateral damage, intentional damage, and we're responsible for the collateral damage that happens. In other words, we intentionally sin, and we're responsible for that, and all the after effects of that sin we're also responsible for. Because we're giving up sinful activities, and we're engaged in the chanting of the holy names, we're engaged in the devotional service of Krishna, we're engaged in so many different things. It's just like when I'm driving in my car, so many bugs are being run over, so many bugs are hitting the windshield. Usually there's a tape of Srila Prabhupada. I hope it goes through the windshield and protects the bugs and stuff like that. But the idea is that because we're engaging the car, we're engaging ourselves in the devotional service of Krishna. Krishna says that I'll protect you from all the sinful reactions that may be there, these residual sinful reactions. The Bhagavatam explains that all things are reduced practically to nil. And why it says practically to nil is because we still have a material body that has to undergo the process of aging and dying and getting disease and stuff like that. And so it may appear that we're still under the influence of the material energy, but the plug has been removed, and we're only getting a residual effect from the previous activities. And so one who takes the devotional service, Krishna says, I'll protect you. I'll protect you from all sinful reactions. Do not fear, he says. Do not fear. And so that's how one walks within this world, but is not part of the world. One is engaged in the world, right? We're engaged here. But because we're engaged in the devotional service of Krishna, then we're protected. Is that okay?
Yeah, I was thinking of the bank. I went to the bank today, and like a teller at the bank, if they understand that the money that's being deposited and coming in and out of the bank is not theirs, then it's a very peaceful situation. Doesn't create any anxiety. But if the person at the bank started to take $5 for themselves when they weren't supposed to, it would cause a lot of anxiety and stress. I was wondering if that's sort of like when you're doing devotional service, you're you're obedient to Krishna, so you're not creating any waves or karmic confusion. But
Yes.
Is that the right idea?
Yeah, that's one way. We use the bank analogy. We have those different bank analogies. You know, the cashier is counting millions of dollars, but he understands that it doesn't belong to him. So in the same way, a devotee engages in so many activities, but he only engages in activities for Krishna, and so we're protected. We also have the analogy of the bank of putting the money in the wrong account. You know? And then we all of a sudden, when we go to make a withdrawal, we find out that there's nothing in there. As I told our Guru Cool Boys that when you whatever you do in life is like putting products in a shopping cart. You go through the aisles. You put some milk or butter or whatever, grains or rice or whatever. You put it in the cart, and then you have to go through the checkout, and you have to pay for it. So in the same way, we go through life and we're performing so many activities, and each and every activity has a reaction that is due to it. In the 4th chapter of the Gita, it's described that the intricacies of action are very difficult. This action and reaction are very difficult to understand. And so to undo an activity by doing a pious, to undo an impious activity by doing a pious activity, you'll never really come to the end with that. So the best thing to do is to only do activities which are in correlation to Krishna. Because if they're in correlation to Krishna, connected to Krishna, then there's no sinful result. There's no sinful result. Otherwise, why is Krishna telling Arjuna to kill? To not kill someone is a very pious thing. But he says that, no, you must. Because this is your dharma, this is your duty. Now we got Hare Krishna.
So Maharaj, just a question. How to preach to a really stubborn person? Like, no matter what you say to this person, they'll kind of twist it and find some way to satisfy, like, their, I guess, sense gratification instead of, like,
Get some of Rhtadhvaja's peanut butter burfi and give it to him and tell him, Hare Krishna. Why, Sarvabhauma's peanut butter burfi has convinced many a stubborn person, many a stubborn minds. And why would one want to disturb another person? In other words, if we just become stubborn, trying to convince a stubborn person, means that when you go like that, you got 3 coming towards yourself. And so we also may be stubborn, although we may have the right idea. We don't, there's a proper way to distribute it and an improper way to distribute it. Some other takeaways, some other reflections. Well, I have to get this group trained up to do reflections and any questions?
Did you study any type of Bhagavad-Gita before you read Bhagavad-Gita as it is?
No, I didn't have very much interest. I was one of the ones that got caught up in the wake. It's described that when a great acharya comes through the universe, like Srila Prabhupada did, there are many people that are standing ready to help, but also some people that are on the fringe. They get caught in the wake. They get caught in the vortex, the power that great personality pulls through. And so I was one that was on the fringe. I wasn't like Rhtadhvaja, where I was like hitchhiking all the way through Europe and the Middle East to get a guru, or Rhtadhvaja Swami, who was waiting for his last semester of college so he could take a trip to India to find a guru. One just happened to show up at my doorstep one day. That's all. It's a difference.
Okay.
And actually, the first time I read the Bhagavad-Gita, I didn't practically understand it at all. I mean, I think I'd been in the movement about a year and a half before when I actually understood that it says you're not the body. It took me a little while longer, but I really was attracted to Krishna book. And now when I read Krishna book, I find that Krishna book has as much or almost more direct philosophy or direct kind of like systematic preaching than the Gita. In the Gita, in one sense, the Krishna book is just filled with, you start talking about the Adam and all these different analogies that are there and how crystal clear it was for me. It's so easy it was for me. Yeah. With the Bhagavad Gita, you can see mine, it's got these little tabs on it. It's something that should be gone through on a daily basis. We just had a wedding here the other day, and I gave the bride and, you call them groom, bride and groom, and I gave him a Bhagavad Gita, and I say, if you read 2 pages a day, you read the whole Gita every year. You just read 2 pages a day, you read the whole Bhagavad Gita every year. 2 pages is like just a few minutes. And then I said, by the time you have grandchildren, you'll read the Gita like 40 times, and you'll be able to help your grandchildren advance in spiritual life. So they were quite happy to get the Bhagavad Gita, because it's not, like they say, it's a manual to get out of the material world, and so we have to open it. I mean, just like when you get a product and you try to engage it without reading the instructions, or like when you get, like, say, a cabinet or some kind of like thing that you have to build, and you don't follow the instructions to put the number 1 screw in the number 1 hole and the number 2 screw in the number 2 hole, and the next thing you start doing on your own speculation, the whole thing's like, bent and twisted upside down, and then you have to undo everything and to go back and follow the directions. So that's what the Bhagavad Gita is. It's actually it's a guidebook. It's a guidebook, and the first thing it teaches us is that Dehi nasmin yata dehe komaram yoganam jaram yata dharam dharapapya didastapam, that the deha, the body, the soul resides within the deha, within the body. And the body undergoes change from childhood to youth to old age. And one who's a little sober, he doesn't become bewildered by this changing of body, and understand when he leaves this body, he actually enters into another body, another type of body. And so this is the basic teachings of the Gita to give us relief from the perplexities. In other words, if we think we're this material body, oh man, it's just like, it's so distressing. So distressing, but at least when we understand that this isn't me, that there's something beside this, or something that's would you say, bringing life to this body, that's the true me. Who was I was, Srila Prabhupada was, very heavy, in his lecture. He say someone is lamenting over their passing of a relative, and I would say, you never knew the person. The body is sitting there right in front of you. What are you missing? What's missing? The person, the soul is actually missing from the body. And so you never really knew the person. What Prabhupada said, you never really knew. You only knew a reflection of that person. In other words, the soul comes through the material energy, goodness, passion, and ignorance. And body is made out of the 3 modes of material nature. And now it's just like white light is originally white, or whatever color it is. And if you put a green shield on it, it looks green. You put a yellow shield, it looks yellow. You put a red shield, it looks red. And so in the same way, we're an eternal part and parcel of Krishna, has an eternal relationship with Krishna. Now it's just covered by this shield that I appear to be a 69-year-old American guy sitting in a green room with the orange couch and the orange T-shirt. And, it just appears that way, when in actuality, I have nothing to do with this tabernacle. I'm just residing in it. I'm just residing in it for a temporary period of time. Any other comments or questions?
Jenya asks, how does intelligence affect the illusion of material existence, positive or negative?
What can you somehow there pause for a second? Can you repeat that?
Sure. Jenya asks, how does intelligence affect the illusion of material existence? Is it positive or negative?
Okay, let me just see what she said. Well, that's not. Jenya says, can you say it again? Because it's echoing for some reason. I can't hear exactly what you're saying.
Jenya says, how does intelligence affect the illusion of material existence?
It's breaking up for me.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Is it breaking up for anybody else? Or is it just me? No, it's breaking up for Gobaki also.
I can hear it looping.
Maybe just post it. Can you post it?
Sure.
Yeah. Post it, then I can read it. Post it in the chat. How does intelligence affect the illusion of material existence, positive or negative? How does intelligence affect the illusion of material existence, positive or negative? I'm not quite sure what that question means. Can somebody help me? How does intelligence affect the illusion of material existence, positive or negative? I'm not. Rubati, do you understand the meaning of that question?
Maybe Jenya, you can explain it.
Can you open it up a little bit for us, Jenya?
Or maybe she means, can the intelligence be contaminated by material nature or?
Well, Jenya's got her microphone now. Let's see what she says. Maybe her microphone is not on. Oh, connecting while she's trying to connect. Are you there, Jenya? Okay. I don't even want to enter it because I don't know what it means. The intelligence is there. The intelligence is you. It's just like in the 3rd chapter of the Gita, it's described that Indriya Mana Buddhi, that there's the senses, the mind, and the intelligence. And Prabhupada breaks it down into the senses. They bring in knowledge of the sense objects. Those 5 knowledge acquiring senses, and they bring in knowledge. They bring in information, and the mind accepts or rejects it according to the nature that it has acquired by the modes of material nature: goodness, passion, and ignorance. And so, if someone is in the mode of goodness, they may like to live in the country. If someone's in the mode of passion, they may prefer the city. If someone's in the mode of ignorance, they may prefer the what would you call it, nightclub or something like that. And according to that nature, they'll accept or reject something that the senses bring in, and the intelligence is used to figure out how to do that. And so what happens is that the intelligence is very, very close to the spirit soul, and what happens is that due to that influence, the intelligence becomes polluted by the modes of material nature, and it acquires the false ego, a false identity of themselves being this material body and mind. And then the mind business is to protect that false ego, to protect that false identification of myself, because it's based on the modes of material nature. We have a false identification of who we are. We think we're this material body. We think that we're this material mind, especially the material mind and stuff like that. And so how does it affect the illusion of material existence? One thing that can happen is that it's like there's a nice verse, like somehow or another, I always quote this verse from the 2nd chapter where it describes that one who is not in Krishna consciousness cannot have, one is not connected to the Supreme in Krishna consciousness can have neither transcendental intelligence. Transcendental, we can have material intelligence, but we don't have transcendental intelligence. And without transcendental intelligence, one cannot have a steady mind. And without which there's no possibility of peace. If the mind is not steady, one can never become peaceful. And how can there be any happiness without peace? And so how the intelligence is affected in the material world is that it becomes bewildered by the modes of material nature, and it produces a false identification with this material body. In other words, that false ego comes from that, and that's all given in the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavad-Gita, right towards it's the second to the last topic in the 3rd chapter, when Arjuna asked Krishna, Artakena Payuktoyam Papam Kariti Purusha, why is one engaged in sinful activities as if engaged by force? And Krishna explains that whole series with him there. And in one of the verses, the one that I quoted, where it's described Indriyamana Buddhi, Prabhupada explains it that the enemy has captured different strategic positions in the body of the conditioned soul. And he's giving ideas where it's at. So the senses, the mind, and the intelligence are the sitting places for material desire. And so the mind is the center of all activities of the senses. In other words, the mind is considered to be the 6th sense. And so when the knowledge-acquiring senses bring the information into the mind, and thus we hear about sense objects or see sense objects, the mind becomes a reservoir of all the ideas for sense gratification. And as a result, the mind and senses become repositories for lust. And Prabhupada says, next, the intelligence department becomes the capital of such lustful propensities. Intelligence is the immediate next-door neighbor to the spirit soul. Thus, the intelligence influences the spirit soul to acquire a false ego and identify himself with matter, and thus with the mind and senses. So this is the whole thing, that we end up in this kind of like situation where catch-22, where we're caught in this nescience. So Krishna tells Arjuna, after these verses, Krishna tells Arjuna, Tasmatvam indriyanya naniyamya bharatarshibha. Therefore, in the very beginning, regulate the senses, and curb the great symbol of sin, kama. By regulating senses, this kama, it actually destroys our spiritual knowledge and our urge for self-realization. And that's brought out in the purport of the 42nd verse, where Prabhupada explains that the Lord advised Arjuna to regulate the senses from the very beginning so that he could curb the greatest enemy, kama, which destroys the urge for self-realization. In other words, everyone, I've mentioned this point so many times, especially every human, we're curious. How, when you look up in the sky, Prabhupada mentions in the introduction to the Bhagavatam, you look up in the sky and you wonder, what is this? Where is this coming from? What is all this all about? And then Prabhupada says, and specifically knowledge of the self. So knowledge of our true self is destroyed by our desire to engage in repetitive acts of sense gratification. These are actually sinful things. And when we engage in those things repetitively, we actually become addicted to them. We think this is the only source of our happiness, and we strive for these. What do you call them? Fallible soldiers. Those things that don't produce any true result. And I was listening to a lecture just 2 days ago where Prabhupada was explaining, when you come to the shore of Krishna consciousness, don't lose the opportunity. Utilize this opportunity. We've come to the shore of Krishna consciousness. In other words, we're like right there. We're ready to jump in. And Prabhupada says, just make the effort, make the attempt, go for it. Just do it. And don't waste the human form of life, because there's no guarantee that we can actually keep this human form of life. We don't know where we're going. We have no idea. Any other?
Hare Krishna, I just wanted to mention that you made me think of how the false ego is always busy protecting the false identity.
The mind is protecting the false ego. the mind begins to protect the false ego, and the false ego is our misidentification that we falsely identify. Ego is okay. Ego means the spiritual identity, aham brahmasmi. False ego means I think that I'm American, I think I'm 69 years, I think I have blue eyes. And so, we can actually experience our mind, trying to protect that. In other words, when I say that, it means like if I tell you, your mustache looks ridiculous, you immediately think, what do you mean my mustache looks ridiculous? That's not true. My mustache is the best mustache in the whole. Not that I think your mustache looks ridiculous. I'm just using it as an example. And so it just causes, that false ego, we're always, the mind is already ready to protect it. No, I have the best this, I have the best that, And every living entity thinks like that. I remember one time I was going to a latch show from Gainesville. It's only a 20-minute drive to give the Sunday feast lecture. And I saw a dog on the road, and he was just like, I'm the owner of this area. Just like he had this big false ego. And it was just very prominent. It was very, very prominent, this big dog false ego. More than Hare Krishna's Supreme Personality, dog had false ego. And yeah, like that. Asnita, you have a question? You got your hand up there? Or is that my hand? No, that's my hand. Sorry. It wasn't a yellow hand. It was my thing. There was something on the chat. Okay, thank you, Jenya. I hope I got it through right. So it's 8:00. I don't know what we're supposed to do here. Are we taking more questions, or does anybody have any other questions or comments?
I was going to, you mentioned that we have to open up the manual, we have to open up the Bhagavad-Gita to understand what Krishna says. And then you also said, when you come to the show of Krishna consciousness, we have to make that leap. So how do we keep that enthusiasm, or how do we keep that inspiration to continue on the path?
Yeah. Prabhupada just gave that example the other day. That there are 6 things that are very positive influences for us to engage in devotional service, and utsahan, enthusiasm, and determination. When Prabhupada described that one should be determined, two ways to describe that word. One is determination, and one is confidence. And Prabhupada said one should be determined and confident that through this process that I'll actually go back to God. I'll actually go home. And and have to be very patient in this process. One of my friends just had a kind of a major surgery, and I was talking with them, and they were saying that they're not a very patient person in recovery. In other words, they're okay now, they're just waiting to recover, and they're not very patient. They're not very patient. And I said, just think, what it would have been like if you hadn't had this and hadn't caught it in an early stage, and then see how patient you would have had to been to go through a heavier medical procedure. And so she actually said, yes, that's true. And I was like, I'm very grateful for that. And so that patience is necessary. And so how do we remain enthusiastic? In the beginning, Prabhupada says it has to be like military discipline. In the beginning, just like military discipline. And military discipline means when they say left face, you go left. When they say right face, you go right. When they say forward march, you go forward. When they say back step, I don't know if they say to go backwards. I was never in that situation. But I appreciate those who have undergone that. I didn't. And so, as if a military discipline, and there was a story, I think it was Garga Muni in the very beginning, told Prabhupada that I don't like offering obeisances. Prabhupada said, just do it, and you'll learn to like it, you'll learn to appreciate it. And so in the same way, due to the layers of conditioning that we have upon us, we have to recondition ourselves. We have to go through a reconditioning cycle. And by doing that, we'll actually come to the point of wanting to do it. And that's called ruchi, or taste. Adoshana, that in the beginning there has to be a little faith. We are hearing, and then by having that little faith, one gets association. By association, one gets guru. By guru, one gets engagement into this thing, and eventually, one gets a taste. One will actually desire to do this rather than something else. Vishayavani vartante nirahara shadehina. That one may restrict oneself from sense objects, but by giving up the objects of sense gratification and utilizing our senses in the service of Krishna, Padam Dristanda Vartante, one will get a higher taste, because that is the nature of the soul. The soul has just like the body wants, it's like I'm drinking a lot of water. The body needs water, the body needs food, the body needs sunlight. It needs so many things, but the soul also has needs. And the soul needs to be engaged in the devotional service of the Supreme Lord. And so by doing that, we'll actually become satisfied at heart. We'll become more satisfied at heart than if we're just trying to, satisfy our senses independently. There's another one of our famous Hare Krishna plays where, if you try to, in order to nourish the body, you have to feed the stomach. So it has to go. You can't feed yourself through the ear. You can't feed yourself through the eye. You can't feed yourself through the nose. I guess you can do that nose thing, but I mean, if you're in the hospital, they feed you in the nose sometimes. But in general, you use this a particular system. In the same way, the Bhagavatam describes another analogy is that water, in order to nourish the tree, you have to water the root. And so in the same way, when we water the root of our spiritual nature by engaging in the devotional service of the Lord, we actually become satisfied. And we'll get a taste. It's just like anything else. It takes practice. And I just saw today Krishna Kishore, I think his name is. I can't remember the third part of his name. Shaipa Thakur's disciples. He has lots of names. And he was saying that when they asked him how he became Krishna conscious and see what he was doing, how he progressed, and he said at a certain point, it just became very important for him. And so the time that it becomes important for us, we'll take shelter. Another thing is, it's just like when we understand the urgency. If we can actually understand the urgency of this message, Prabhupada mentions in several places in the Gita, it's a very urgent message because we don't know what our current situation and how long it's going to last. Happen anymore. So how to remain enthusiastic? Prabhupada said just be enthusiastic. That was one class he gave in Seattle. Someone asked him how we can become better devotees, and he said by your eagerness, akuti, by your eagerness to engage in devotional service. And there was one time in Bombay when a lot of the leaders were there. And they're having problems getting what do they call it, the permission for the temple in Bombay, and the devotees were kind of like slumped down during the Guru Puja or during the Kirtan. And Prabhupada said, even if you don't get the conveyance, you still must dance during the arti. Even if you don't feel like it, you should dance in anyway in arti, because that'll give you enthusiasm. And it's like an exercise program. If you're going to the gym and you just look at the stairmaster or the what do they call that thing, the walking thing or the barbell thing, you just go to the gym and look at it. Because the outside doesn't do any good. You have to go inside and have to start participating in the exercise program. And so in the same way, you have to, sometimes a little bit by force, but actually, one will actually feel relieved at it. Sarvabhauma, you're leaning forward. Do you have a comment? Sarvabhauma is a very deep thing. When I saw him leaning forward, I thought he was ready to say something.
I was just grabbing something, but...
Oh, okay. Does that help, Prabhupada? I mean, I know it's like a little... It's just a matter of doing. It's like I don't know how to say it, Nike T-shirt, just do it. I think Vaisheshika says just do it. And then we can build good habits. And we can actually build good habits by regulation. Regulation is actually the mode of goodness. When we regulate our lives, it's very good to have a regulated life. Everything has a place, everything in its place, timing and stuff like that, unless you have a, what would you say, complicated schedule or unsteady schedule. But then even in the 12th chapter of the Gita, Krishna says one who is not attached to the ordinary course of activity is very dear to him. So even if you have a situation that you can't keep in a proper flow, you're still dear to Krishna if you keep Krishna focused in those unsteady times. That's very good.
Thank you.
Is that Madhuri? Rhtadhvaja? Is that Mohini? Is Madhuri? I don't know how to spell Mohini's name.
Yeah, it is Mohini's name, Madhuri Radha.
Yes, Maharaj.
Oh, okay. All of a sudden I just said, wait a second, I know that person. Okay. I just never saw it spelled before. So it was like and it took me 55 minutes to catch it.
She has a beautiful son.
Yeah, very dark. Yeah. And I see my close friend Tamakriya here. Okay, so I don't know how long we're supposed to go, Winston. I think it's 8 o'clock. It's supposed to be cut off, right?
Yeah, just about. Does anyone have any final questions or reflections before we close?
I see the Bangla's on here. She usually has a lot of good reflections and comments, but long days these days for everybody.
All right.
Everyone got sick.
Well,
just a common cold and chicken pox, nothing serious.
Yeah.
No COVID. Thank God, no COVID.
Thank goodness. Yeah, hopefully we got our shots.
Okay, thank you all very much.